So this presentation today is on the Ag Water Quality Program at ODA and how it relates to your soil and water conservation district programs. As I said, Ellen is going to be doing the presentation, and what I'll do is I'm just going to hand it off to her. A couple of housekeeping things. Please keep yourself muted, and unless you have a question. Ellen has asked that you try to type your questions in the chat, and she and I will be monitoring that. We'll try that first. If that doesn't work, then maybe we'll ask if to do them orally, but try to do them in the chat box first. There are a bunch of materials on the ODA website in the SWCD program and the section on training. And this recording of this will be up on that in a couple of days too. And her PowerPoint presentation is also going to be up there probably by the end of the day or tomorrow. So Ellen, I will turn the presenter mode over to you and let you go ahead.
Okay. Hang on just a sec, guys, gals. Come on. That's my dog Jackson at the beach. Here we go. Okay, oh good. Eric, it looks like I can see the chat box at my end too. But so between the two of us, we'll get this worked out. So welcome everybody, and just looking through the list, it looks like I'm recognizing some districts. I see Arnie's on here. It looks like Morrow, Lynn, let's see, Umpqua, and so, oh, there's Jen. So it looks like we got districts all across the state, which is great. And so what I'm going to try to do after most of these slides, if I remember, is to ask for questions. But Eric and I will also be looking in the chat box. And excellent. Curry's on here, Illinois Valley. Excellent. Just keep indicating where you're from there, and that would be wonderful. And so I'm Ellen Hammond. I was one of the original hires when this program started almost 24 years ago. So I've been through the whole thing. And for the first 20 years, I was a regional water quality specialist out of Bend in Eastern Oregon. Since then, I've got statewide responsibilities that include mostly monitoring, but I've picked up a big project that's starting out in the Willamette Valley and South Coast, the ditch maintenance or the channel maintenance program. And I'll just briefly touch on that at the very end. So let's see, come on, cursor. I'm going to start with some kind of gory details about water quality requirements and how that part works, because that frames the work that we do in the Ag Water Quality Program. And for those of you who haven't seen me before, that's me back in happier times when we were out in the field interacting with people. And I'm doing macroinvertebrates with kids down in probably Lake County. So after I do the background stuff, I'm going to go through each of the Ag Water Quality Program basic elements and explain what ODA is doing or trying to do, and also how soil and water conservation districts fit into that. So again, knock yourself out with questions. And I'm going to start with the Federal Clean Water Act, because it directs some of what the state is doing, not all of it. We have our own regulations too. And so Clean Water Act goes back to 1972, and it set requirements for the nation, basically to make the waters fishable, swimmable, and drinkable again. But within this framework, it told each state to develop its own program to address water quality. So even though there's basic requirements, it's still up to states to figure out how to make it work for them. And they still need to submit their ideas and plans to EPA for approval. But if you were to look up, you would, on the internet, you'd find there's 50 different programs around the country. Also, EPA actually runs the water quality program in some states, but most states, they've delegated authority to a certain entity. And in Oregon, that's DEQ. Excuse me. So some of the requirements for states are they need to figure out what the beneficial uses of water are for water quality. Again, mostly related to fishing, swimming, drinking, but all kinds of other uses like hydropower or human contact recreation. There's a whole lot of different beneficial uses. Then each state has to figure out what parameters they need to monitor in order to determine if that beneficial use would be met, and then set standards for those parameters. So for instance, there's beneficial use, human contact recreation. DEQ is monitoring E. coli bacteria. And there's 2 criteria, one for grab samples and one if you have sufficient samples within a 90-day period. Each state also has to create what we all know of as the 303D list, which is that list of impaired waters where it's determined that beneficial uses aren't being met because those water quality standards aren't being met. They are also required to develop TMDLs for impaired waters. And TMDL refers to both a process and a document. And in that process, they identify issues and they figure out who's responsible, what kind of entity, maybe it's certain point sources, or maybe it's forestry or it's agriculture, and develop load allocations, which means that DEQ says, okay, you guys, agriculture, or maybe it's all non-point sources together because they couldn't separate it out. You need to reduce your bacteria contributions to this river by 80%. And then the TMDL also includes the water quality management plans, where each of those responsible parties has to put together a document that says how they plan to address their load allocations. And for TMDLs that include agriculture as a responsible party or a designated management agency, the ag water quality plans serve as the management plan for that TMDL. So are there any questions? I don't see any coming up in the chat box yet. Does anybody have a verbal question to ask? Okay. And in Oregon, sorry, was someone about to ask something?
Yeah, hi, Ellen. This is Michael Clary with the Coos Soil and Water Conservation District. Hi, just real quick, you touched on this, but I just want to make sure I'm clear. The agricultural lands, are those do those include forest lands, or are those considered separate in the state of Oregon? I know that at the federal level, the U.S. Forest Service, for example, is part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. When you talk about ag water quality, are we including Forest Service or forest lands in that?
Excellent question. We are including ag activities on forest lands. So for instance, it's grazed. So the ag activities are under ODA's purview.
So harvesting forests is not considered
that's Department of
agricultural.
No, except for Christmas trees. But other than that, it's Department of Forestry. And so in Oregon, DEQ does all this stuff here on this page. Now there's also an Oregon law that dates back also to 1972, and it's incredibly comprehensive. And it says basically nobody in the state can pollute, which means interfere with beneficial uses, place wastes where they're likely to discharge into water, and wastes can include things like sediment, manure. Again, wastes are things that can affect the beneficial uses, and you can't discharge in such a way to violate water quality standards. And this applies to waters of the state. Just a heads up, there's several different definitions of waters of the state that different agencies use, like DSL has a definition. We use the one that DEQ uses, and that includes just about any water body you can think of, because it applies to anything with a hydrologic connection to ground or surface water. So just think about that and realize it's just about everything. This law is much more restrictive actually than federal law. And you might hear waters of the United States and all that kind of stuff. Well, we're already covering just about every water there is related to water quality in this state. Any questions? Okay, so this is going to get a little bit to the question that was just asked. And that is, in Oregon, there are several entities that are responsible for dealing with water quality. So DEQ directly looks at things like urban runoff, stormwater, wastewater treatment plants, ODOT right-of-ways, and all those point sources like paper mills or anything you can think of, including food processors. So the folks up in Hood River that are making juice and stuff, their discharges to local waters is actually regulated by DEQ. Department of Forestry looks at, oh, and also federal lands. DEQ is responsible for dealing with federal agencies. Department of Forestry deals with forestry on non-federal lands. And starting back in 1972, ODA, or maybe not 72, sorry, I shouldn't go back that far, but ODA was given authority by DEQ to regulate confined animal feeding operations, which are considered agricultural point sources under the Federal Clean Water Act and need permits. So ODA actually does CAFOs. Now, since 1993, we have been regulating ag activities on non-federal lands. That is because in 1993, Senate Bill 1010 got passed, and then a few years later, another Senate bill. And between the two of them, what they said was Department of Agriculture is responsible. We're the lead agency for regulating water quality in the state of Oregon from agriculture. DEQ never lost their authority, so theoretically DEQ could come in and say, we don't like what you're doing, ag, we're gonna take over, but they sure as heck don't want to have to add that to their plate. So we don't use the phrase Senate Bill 1010 anymore, because every time there's a legislative session, there's a Senate Bill 1010. So it's the Ag Water Quality Management Act. And what this meant is that ODA is responsible for preventing and controlling water pollution from agricultural activities in the state of Oregon. We have regulatory authority, but also our rules say to only use that regulatory authority as a last resort. Try voluntary efforts first. So what our program is trying to do is to meet water quality standards in those TMDL load allocations wherever it's possible. Here's a few basics on our program. Again, ODA leads it. And as a result of the legislation back in the early 90s, Department of Agriculture ended up with 38 water quality management areas around the state. And those are all those little black lines in the map. And we put together local advisory committees to help us with each one of those plans. The local advisory committees consist of up to 12 members, of which the majority must be landowners in the affected area. But these local advisory committees all include what is called a balance of interests. So maybe environmentalists or a city or a county or somebody from Department of Forestry, because there's a whole lot of livestock grazing going on. Could be irrigation districts, whatever, tribal members. And also these local advisory committees back around 20 years ago, they worked with ODA to develop an area plan and advise us on adopting area rules or requirements for agriculture for each of these management areas. And we are required to work with soil and water conservation districts to the maximum extent practicable. So soil and water conservation districts are our allies in this process. I mentioned before that our focus is on voluntary efforts, but we also regulate. And I'll talk about all of these things as I move forward in this presentation. So on this map, you'll see colored regions, and those are our regional water quality specialist areas right now. And like I said, I was a regional water quality specialist in Eastern Oregon for 20 years. And I had most of the green area and sometimes the Klamath and all the orange area and part of the pink area, depending on what year it was. So that's the basics of the Ag Water Quality Program. I mentioned the rules and that we try to get compliance with the area rules through encouraging landowners to do the right thing, but we will do enforcement when necessary. So there's 38 sets of area rules around the state. Each set has at least 2 rules, and they may add other ones that are appropriate for their area, maybe relating to tide gates or irrigation runoff, or there's a whole host of different things. And so the statute for the state that I talked about, don't pollute, don't place wastes where they're likely to enter waters of the state, etc. That's Oregon Revised Statute 468B. It's a DEQ statute. But so that ODA could enforce it, it became a part of the area rules. So every area rule says something about you can't pollute or you can't violate ORS 468B. ODA didn't think this through real well, and so there's probably about 30 different versions of the wording, depending on which area rules you're looking at, but that's the basic, comes down to you can't violate the state statute. The second rule is one related to streamside vegetation. There's about 30 different wordings of that rule also, but they come down to basically these concepts. Landowners have to allow vegetation to establish and grow, and along perennial streams, it's to provide shade, stabilize banks, filter out pollutants. Seasonal streams that aren't flowing in the summer or when we need shade, we're not so worried about shade, but we are still looking at stabilizing banks and filtering out pollutants. Any questions? Okay. Here's just an example. This is from a case I had actually up in, I think, Baker County or Union County, one of them. Union County, I think. So this is a seasonal stream. So the vegetation rule does apply to seasonal streams. And on the top, you see a pond that discharges into this denuded little stream that you see on the bottom. And so it was a violation. There was the landowner was not allowing vegetation to provide water quality functions. On the right, It's in compliance. It was up to the landowner to decide how they wanted to be in compliance, but you can see the difference there. So there's a subtlety involved here about the plan and the rules. The rules are like the bottom line, the minimum requirement for landowners, but it may not lead to actually protecting water quality, which is the goal of the program and the goal of the area plans. And so you see an example here, for instance, for riparian. We're just saying that landowners have to allow riparian veg to establish and grow. And so maybe there's been, and I'm sorry, most of my examples are going to be related to livestock grazing or irrigation, because that's what I'm mostly involved with or have been. And so let's say that someone has been doing season-long grazing and they've kind of nuked the stream bank, but they've modified their season of use and they've put in off-stream water and done a bunch of stuff, and the vegetation is starting to grow. They're in compliance as long as they're allowing that vegetation to grow. Now, it still may not look great, and it still may take 20 years to get to the point where the vegetation is sufficient to provide those water quality functions, but that's the part of the plan. And the voluntary part is we got the bare minimum, and now we need to just get the vegetation to where it can provide those functions. And how do we get there? Well, basically, there's money and information and technical assistance provided to landowners. They do work, it improves the land and it improves the water column. It's, it's that easy to visualize it. It's a lot harder to put it into practice and see how that's going. So I mentioned that we're required to work with soil and water conservation districts to the maximum extent practicable. And so we rely on soil and water conservation districts to help landowners put together partnerships, do all that stuff to help get projects on the ground. And we do that through what we call our scope of work, or SOW funding. The legislature has authorized the same amount of lump sum to watershed councils and to SWCDs. And OWEB administers the funding for the watershed councils. ODA administers it for the SWCDs, although it's still actually coming from OWEB. And so every biennium, your regional water quality specialist works with you to develop a scope of work for the funding that you're going to be getting that comes through us to do those kinds of things, to assist with getting projects in the ground, monitoring. Oops, I should put monitoring up there. I forgot that. I'll fix that. And all those other things that you guys do. So that's the scope of work funding. Right, let's talk about the Ag Water Quality Program. There's basically 4 areas that we focus, and I'm going to go through each of these specifically. And then we have 2 initiatives, the SIAs, or Strategic Implementation Areas, and the focus areas. And then we have this kind of unrelated program that the legislature gave us in 2019 that I am now leading, and I will talk about at the very end. So area plans. Every management area has an area plan. Usually there's 1 SWCD per management area. Not always. Some SWCDs manage 2 or more, 2 to 4 area plans. Some management areas have multiple SWCDs in them. But you can see on the front page that we indicate that you guys are key sources of information. And those area plans basically describe, what are the concerns? What do we suggest should get done? And by the way, here's the area rules, just so everybody remembers these area rules. And what are we planning to do? What did we do? And how are we doing it? Every 2 years, ODA meets with the local advisory committee, the SWCDs, other local partners to review the area plans and the progress. And do we need to change what we're doing? I see a question. I'll get to that in a sec. And these area plans also help direct partner activities, because during the biennial review, we say, okay, what recommendations are there for modifying the program, how we're implementing it here? Should there be more outreach? Should we be doing this or that or that? And then that kind of information, we're hoping the partners will take to heart and say, yeah, you know, we agree, and we're gonna commit to trying to reach the horse owners, or, you know, whatever. Also, your regional water quality specialist is going to be looking a little harder at that part of the area plans when they're negotiating the scope of work with you to say, you know, there's this recommendation here to do a little more vegetation monitoring, you know, in this area. And it looked like you guys thought it was an okay thing, so let's figure out how that's going to happen. Now there's a question from Harney. Can water gaps be considered in compliance even if a 20-foot section of the stream might be void of vegetation? Absolutely, as long as all the cattle don't stand in your water gap all day long and basically turn it into a point source. So water gaps, they're fine. Just try to discourage loafing in your water gaps so we don't have a huge slug of bacteria or dirt from cattle just hanging out there. Does that answer your question, Jason? Go ahead and put the answer in the chat box. Okay, excellent, yes. Are there any questions so far on area plans? All right, let's move on to outreach. So just a reminder that the ODA's Ag Water Quality Program only has about a dozen employees statewide. And right now we are underfunded, understaffed. And we really rely on SWCDs to do a lot of stuff, especially outreach. For ODA, we look at the biennial reviews as a way to exchange information at the local level. We look at the area plans and the information in the area plans as a way to provide information at the local level and beyond. We do presentations when asked. We used to do a ton more. But also we rely on the districts through the scopes of work and other things that you guys are doing to do outreach. Compliance. So when ODA has to do compliance, it starts with an investigation. And just because we investigate something doesn't mean it's going to enforcement yet. There's a difference, and I'll explain that. So an investigation can get triggered by the public submits a written complaint, another agency notifies us of an issue, or we may self-initiate because of something we see on the ground. What we do is we notify the Soil and Water District first to let them know, hey, I got a complaint on this property. Do you know anything about it? Are you guys working with them? Da, 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 da. And then we'll contact the landowner and say, we got a complaint, da, 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 and we'd like to come out and, you know, see what's going on. And if they are willing and the SWCD is willing, then the SWCD accompanies us on our site visits so that the SWCD, can talk about local solutions to their local problem and also ways that they can help the landowner address whatever it is that ODA is identifying. And after the site visit, there are recommendations or requirements. If there's recommendations, it's not enforcement. And however, oh, and we call those pre-enforcement letters. However, if we determine there's a violation, then there are requirements and we call it enforcement. At that point, the landowner is no longer eligible for cost share from the state or from the feds. And so that's just something that everybody needs to keep in mind. Here's statistics from 2019. And these are kind of typical right now for what we get in an average year. There's on the left in the pie chart, there's a green section that I will describe just in a couple minutes. But if you add that to the purple section, you can see that ODA initiates about 1/3 of cases right now. The public, almost, 1/3, and other agencies, 1/3. So that's more or less kind of typical these days. On the right, you can see that most of the concerns are riparian, sediment, manure. The numbers and the height of the bars changes a little bit, but those are really the big three. And on the website for these trainings, ODA added several pieces of information, including the complete report from 2019. So if you want to see in your management area or your county how many complaints there have been, etc., you can take a look at that. If you want more gory details about different types, different levels of recommendations ODA is issued, you can look at that. ODA is authorized to level fines, but we've only done that a few times and they're really pretty small. So it's that's not really something to be concerned about, but definitely go to the website and take a look if you want more details on compliance. Are there any questions about compliance? You guys are a quiet bunch. All right, monitoring. So here's the graphic you saw earlier. And it's possible to track what's going on at each of those 4 steps, but it gets harder as you move to the right to track those items. So it's pretty easy to say, okay, we got, let's see, we wrote 20 proposals, grant requests, and we're awarded 15 of those for $39.2 million. And we did, we met with 800 landowners and did 39 site visits. And then tracking the result of that assistance. Okay, let's see, NRCS, they helped fund 8 irrigation pipelines, but we also know that these other things got done. But then trying to figure out if you made a difference. And that's the hard part. Did it really, all this money, make a difference? And that's now where the state and ODA and the feds and everybody, they want to know, did it make a difference in the land and especially in the water? And up until about maybe 5 years ago, yeah, we were counting assistance and on the ground practices and all this, but folks are saying, yeah, who cares? You spent, $20 million through NRCS and OEB and, the tribes and someone else to do all the stuff, but is anything any better? So that's why ODA is really pushing you guys on things like tracking what's going on the land and in the water column. For most of the monitoring and tracking is being done through water quality monitoring, maybe land monitoring, SIAs and focus areas, which I'll get to, and the reporting, the scopes of work that you guys are reporting in. There's area plan, there's a section in the area plans where we report what's been going on. And then you guys have other avenues for reporting on all this kind of stuff. Right, here's the initiatives. And they're kind of the same, but they're different. They're both focused effort in smallish watersheds, small being a relative term, but they're really focused efforts. Okay, I'll get to that question in a sec. They're really looking at focused efforts and trying to track the land and water, or land and or water parts. Throwing a bunch of money, effort, assistance into an area, tracking what happens on the ground, and looking at, did we improve things? The difference is, the main difference is that SIAs have a compliance portion. In fact, they started out as only compliance. ODA invented SIAs. They were just related to compliance. And then OWEB and DEQ and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, they started participating in them, and it got a little bigger, and I'll explain about that. That's where there's this whole voluntary portion. Okay, there's a question in the chat box from Koos. Do ag water quality management plans include standard water quality monitoring protocols? And I'm going to ask Michael Clary to clarify his question. You mean,
So,
do you mean the management plans or monitoring plans? I don't know what the MPs is.
And yeah, the monitoring plans, I'm sorry, the management plans that we're talking about. Do those include standard protocols for all plan areas?
No. So monitoring is something that ODA did not focus on in the first 10 years because we were so busy trying to figure out the rest of this program. And so the ag water quality management area plans, they will report results. They'll talk about ongoing efforts, but there's nothing that ODA has been doing regarding standard water quality monitoring protocols. Now, if those data go to DEQ, for instance, the project's funded by DEQ, it's funded by OWEB, or starting next biennium, hopefully most of the monitoring that ODA is paying for through scopes of work. Those data all go to DEQ, and they have to follow DEQ QA/QC procedures. And so most of the data that you see reported in water quality management plans probably are following DEQ standard monitoring protocols, because OWEB probably funded them, or DEQ 319 funds probably funded them, but there may be other data that are not. Does that answer your question, Michael?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Okay, we can talk about it more afterwards. If you only think so, but I'm still confusing you, think about it, and we can have another chat. And there may be time at the end of this also to talk about that. All right, strategic implementation areas. There's a big local planning process trying to figure out what area to go to. It includes tons of participation with the SWCD. There's a compliance evaluation that ODA does to get a sense of where the concerns are, and I'll explain that on the next couple slides. We give that information to the Soil and Water Conservation District. SWCD provides technical assistance to the landowners we've adopted as having regulatory concerns. But also, and this is the part that's been new the last couple years, is that there's funding for the SWCDs to work with anybody who wants to improve their property, even if they're in compliance already, but they're like, you know, okay, I'm in compliance, but I'd like my veg to look a little better. Please help me out with some plantings or something. Then ODA, after 4 years, we track to see if all the properties that we thought could be regulatory concerns, our goal is to have them all in compliance. It may not look good, but they're in compliance. And also, there's a whole monitoring component beyond just ODA's compliance evaluation. So right now, OWEB is providing the funding, up to $100,000 per SWCD for their SIA to provide technical assistance and outreach to landowners. It does not include implementation. There are no dedicated implementation funds for SIAs. And $25,000 to kickstart a monitoring program. And that would be landscape or water column to see if we can demonstrate the improvements in the land or water as a result of the $100,000 plus all the implementation that gets done. So ODA does the compliance part, the SWCD is involved in the voluntary part. So let me explain SIAs just a little bit more. Here's the SIA evaluation. ODA is primarily concerned with manure piles, streamside veg, and bare ground. And we start with a remote evaluation, aerial photos, and other information, and try to determine, does it look like we see manure piles or that could enter surface water, or maybe big enough that we could have a groundwater issue, especially if we know there's groundwater issues in that area. Does the streamside veg look hosed, or does it look like it's probably providing, does it look like it's in compliance? Also, does it look like it could be a little better even though it's probably in compliance? And is there a bunch of bare ground that could erode into a creek? So on the right, there's a arrow pointing to a spot, and that would what we'd be seeing and trying to get an idea of how to categorize it. Then we do a field evaluation, and from public viewpoints, we try to confirm everything that we thought we saw or interpreted on the aerial photos. And here are the let's start over. Here are the 4 categories that we put each tax lot into. One is, basically we just don't see an issue. The next is, well, it's in compliance, but it could look a little better. The third is, this is not looking good, or it could be really bad, but we still have to, oh, I might have a typo on that slide. Let's see. No, that's all right. Or we thought it was an issue, but we couldn't really tell in the remote. And maybe it looked really bad on the remote, but we can't see it from the field. So it stays an opportunity for improvement. A potential violation is something that we see out in the field that indicates there's potential violation of the area rules. And we may see, there may be tax lots that look fine on the aerials, but we're driving around and it's like, yeah, there's a lot of trees up there, but underneath the trees, it is bare ground and eroding into the creek. Or we may see stuff that looks not good on an aerial, but the aerial may be a year old and we're driving around, we say, oh yeah, all right, they've already taken care of something there. So those are the 4 categories that all tax lots end up in. And our goal is within 4 years that any opportunities for improvement and potential violations have gone into the limited or low categories. Here is an example. Well, here's a typical example of the results we see. This was Wasco, and 254 tax lots that were evaluated there in that area. And out of those, only 7 had potential regulatory issues. The SWCD worked with all those, and within 4 years, they were down into the limited or low categories. And those kind of percentages are real typical for, we've done SIAs now, I think we're at about 40 SIAs now. Some of them are just starting, but we're finding generally that maybe only like 3% of the tax lots are have potential violations of them on them in some sort. So that's it on the SIAs. Any questions on SIAs? Okay. Focus areas. So focus areas are a little different. They're all voluntary. And we got this thing called measurable objectives in the second little box there. And what we want to do with focus areas is the SWCD picks the area. They fund it through the scope of work and any other funds they want to scrounge around for implementation. And we review it and we help you guys figure out how to assess and track your improvements. So you pick an area, there's a pre-assessment, and when you get those results, you set measurable objectives. And that means, okay, we're going to do a vegetation assessment, and we don't like that there's that much bare ground along the creeks. So we think we're going to be in this focus area for, oh, I don't know, maybe 10 years. Where do we want to be in 10 years? How much less bare ground do we want? Okay, that's our measurable objective. And then the SWCD works with landowners and every couple of years tracks how we're doing towards that measurable objective. And then you close out the focus area whenever you want. If partway through you're realizing we still want to keep working here for 10 years, but there's no way we're going to meet that measurable objective, okay, well, let's change it to something that is achievable. That's part of the definition of measurable objectives. Measurable objectives, they're smart, they're specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're relevant to what you're trying to accomplish, and there's a time frame associated with them. Okay, here's a question. The numbers on counties are projects that you are monitoring. Can I find them online? I'm sorry, are you referring to this map here, Susanna? I'm afraid you are. If you are, those are the numbers of each SIA, because there's a whole list that I didn't put on here. So that's just refers to each SIA. Is that the number that you were looking at, Susanna? Go ahead and turn off your microphone or turn it on.
Yes, you're right.
Okay.
I was
So,
curious
no.
about that, like County 7.
Sorry, you went in and out. Go ahead, say that again.
Oh, say Clatsop County shows 17.
Okay, 17 just means that's number 17 of the SIAs. So each of these SIAs just has an identifying number. So that has nothing to do with anything other than identifying each SIA, starting in 1, going up to, looks like 41 or something. So in terms of projects that we are monitoring, what do you mean by projects that we are monitoring? What are you thinking of in your head?
Oh, I don't know all the terminology. You know, you're describing, you know, something comes to somebody's attention and then you figure out a plan, local plan and evaluation, that whole list of protocols that one goes through, and hopefully you end up with clean water.
Okay,
That's
so there's
what I
multiple different
was-
initiatives. All right,
Yeah,
so that's, okay, so that we're tracking SIAs. Here's SIAs, and I'll show you where the focus areas. So we're tracking those. If districts are running their monitoring plans through us, then we are looking at those, but there's not that many of them. There's only maybe 5 that are running their actual monitoring, like water quality monitoring through us. So you can't really, you can find some of this stuff online, but not what you're wanting to find. I will say, because that reminds me that also on the website for these trainings, there's several documents that describe the SIA process more. So you can look at those to find out more about SIAs. But what happens is when we do an area plan like Clatsop, I guess that would that'd be the North Coast, I believe, that plan. There should be information in the area plan that the regional water quality specialist has gotten from the SWCD to indicate the kind of work that's being done in that part of the North Coast management area. And all the water quality management area plans are online. I should make that. I meant to do that on the last slide too. Darn it. This, if you go, I'm sorry, I'm gonna zip back here to here. At the bottom on the right, unfortunately, if you type in that website down here at the bottom, that will show you the list of ag water quality plans, including the map. And you can click on the water quality plan for your area, the most recent one. And that's the only way right now that we're tracking all the stuff that's going on in a management area. So that may not have been the answer you wanted, but it's the only answer I can give right now. Okay, focus area. So here, this is the crowning glory of focus areas, just to show you what we're really hoping comes out of focus areas. This is related to irrigation runoff and the conversion from flood to sprinkler south of Ontario over in southeastern Oregon. So for 10 years, they worked to pipe laterals and do on-farm irrigation water management and all that kind of stuff to convert from flood to sprinkler. And so on the left, you can see the peachy color, that's flood irrigation going from 60% to 16%. Wheel lines and pivots going from 15% to 76%. At the same time, the flow coming out of the mouth of that drain directly into the Owyhee River was reduced by maybe about a quarter. And on the far right, the total suspended solids flowing into the Owyhee River from this drain dropped from like around 500 milligrams per liter average to less than 50. And so it's hard to do this kind of thing. You need a really focused area. You need to have motivated landowners. You need to have all kinds of great, happy things come together. But this is kind of the epitome of what could happen in a focus area. We also have a great result from Curry County with temperature and stuff, but I just didn't have time to add that in here. Most focus areas, we're not getting that because focus areas can be challenging. It's all voluntary. OWEB's not giving you $100,000 to do all this technical assistance and outreach. And so we've got focus areas right now. Each SWCD statewide has one, and they're been required to spend 25% of their scope of work for their focus area, which is really not a lot of money. And there's a lot of talks right now. In fact, all SWCDs were invited to provide input on focus areas because ODA is looking at all kinds of things we're doing to see if there's changes we can make because of our reduced staffing and funding. Are there any questions on focus areas? All right. The Ag Drainage Channel Maintenance Program, established 2 years ago. It took some authorities away from DSL and gave them to ODA. It changed a DSL permit to a notification process. If you want a description of anything I'm talking about, let me know and we'll set up a presentation for your SWCD if you haven't had one already. The whole idea is for landowners to be able to clean their drainage channels while protecting the environment and especially salmonids. And it's requiring coordination amongst 3 agencies. And there's 23 requirements for landowners to go through this process related to maintaining veg and when the work gets done, what kind of equipment, you know, just all kinds of stuff. And their website is at the bottom. This program is still being developed. It was originally intended for the Willamette Valley and the South Coast, but then somehow when it went to the legislature, it was for the whole state. And we have a better idea of how it works in the Willamette Valley than how it's going to work in Eastern Oregon. But we do have legislation before the legislature right now making its way through the process, hoping that we can phase this process, starting in the Willamette Valley and the South Coast, work out the bugs and move east over the next few years. And for more information, contact your regional water quality specialist listed on the right. And let me explain the attractive darker blue area around Salem. Both of those regional water quality specialist positions became open and were not able to be filled because of COVID-related funding cuts. You see 2 names on the top right. Cheryl Humman and Paul Measles are kind of sharing that area. They used to be our hydrology and riparian specialists. Now they are working more at the regional level. Cheryl will be doing things like your scopes of work, coordinating biennial reviews, that kind of thing. Paul will be related more to compliance and the GWAMA, the South Willamette Valley GWAMA. And they're still, this is just brand new. They're trying to work it out. But anyway, Cheryl's probably in the process of contacting your districts to try to explain what's going on there. So that is the end. And I'm open for any questions. We have 2 minutes left. Oh my God. Anyone have a 2-minute question? If not, contact your local regional water quality specialist, or if you have a question about something I said, get a hold of me. Any questions you want to mention right now? Okay. Eric.
All right. Well, thank you, Ellen. I hope everyone found that helpful and informative. It will be repeated again. I don't remember off the top of my head. Have too many of these. Let me look. Thursday. So if you know anyone else that would be helpful, make sure that they attend. And there's lots of more sessions coming up, both this afternoon and throughout the rest of the week. So hope to see you all. Oh, Susan asked if ever the slides online. They will be posted very soon by our web person, and then probably, hopefully by the end of the week, the actual recording of this session will be available through YouTube, and there'll be a link on the training section of the SWCD website. So if there's not any more questions, thanks very much, and have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, Ellen.